Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Emiel Sebastiaan. I'm with Web3 Scan, and I'm going to do a presentation about Polkadot. Polkadot is a block explorer for the Polkadot ecosystem. We are with Web3 Scan. We are a Dutch company based in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and we make multi-chain data accessible and understandable. So if you look at the blockchain technology, I think we all know that there's several waves of innovation that have taken place. Bitcoin was a single application on a single blockchain, and then Ethereum happened, which scaled up the level of applications we had available with smart contracts. So we had many smart contracts within one single blockchain, and it allowed for intraoperability or interoperability within a single blockchain between these applications. And I think this next generation, we're at the dawn of that, is a heterogeneous multi-chain or multi-chain technology, which allows all these applications to exist on different blockchains and allow interoperability between different blockchains. And if you look at the industry and the ecosystem, these usually follow these innovations of these waves and exchanges, wallets, explorers, infrastructure tools, developers, that all has to be somewhat reinvented or refactored based on these innovations. And we are basically building explorers and infrastructure components for this third generation blockchain technology. So these are some of the forces that have guided us so far. We believe that we're heading towards a future with many specialized interoperable blockchains. These blockchains will be built with few technology frameworks, and as with specialization of blockchains, there's also a specialization in the infrastructure and tooling and service providers in the ecosystem. It's specialized work, and a lot of specialized service providers will emerge to pick up these tasks. And because it's specialized work, a lot of work will be delegated to these specialized service providers, such as companies building block explorers or wallet software, you name it. So what we with Web3 can try to do is make multi-chain data accessible and understandable. We built block explorer technology. These are our activities. We service these technologies ourselves to build large databases, and we harvest all sorts of data for all these blockchains we service, and we help other organizations implement our technology as well, and these are our enterprise solutions. So we think that explorer technologies and analytics technologies are key infrastructure components in blockchain ecosystems, and we hope to be part of a strong alliance in these third generation ecosystems. So we apply our technology in ecosystems, multi-chain ecosystems. There are a number of multi-chain ecosystems on the horizon. The first and foremost we focus on is the Polkadot multi-chain ecosystem, which is about to launch any day now with the Kusama network, which is a pre-production network for Polkadot, which will launch at the end of the year, hopefully. And then there's the energy web, which will likely be a multi-chain ecosystem, and there's Ethereum 2, of course, the sharded Ethereum ecosystem. So in each of these ecosystems, they have somewhat distinct values that differentiate them from another. For example, Web3 with Polkadot tries to decentralize the internet, and governance is a hot topic. How do you deal with change of blockchains, and how do you facilitate change? Whereas Energy Web, for example, has much more a focus on enterprise adoption and regulation. because it's more corporate focused, industry focused. So we, Polkascan is obviously our set of services and products. We focus towards the Polkadot ecosystem. We will have other services tailored to the other multi-chain ecosystems along the way, and this branding allows us, to tailor our proposition specifically for these ecosystems. So if you look at our Explorer and analytics technology, I think these are four notions that help us differentiate our services from others in the space. I think first and foremost it's important to note that we provide open data and open technology. So we build open source block explorers, and it is important to note that, for example, the Ethereum ecosystem, it took 3.5 years after the launch of the Ethereum mainnet for the Ethereum ecosystem to have an open source block explorer. So we really had to trust these handful of entities that provided explorers up to that point that the data was actually a true representation of the data that was found in these blockchains. So we got a grant from Web3 Foundation early this year, and for that grant, we have built an open source block explorer for Substrate, which allows us to build an open source block explorer for Polkadot, for example. And before the Polkadot ecosystem launches, before the pre-production network launches, the ecosystem already has an open source block explorer, and that's quite an achievement for the ecosystem. So another factor that differentiates our technology has to do with the type of data. So we are building the type of block explorer that deals with exhaustive data. You can look at that from two angles or two dimensions. First and foremost, we harvest data of blockchains from genesis to chain tip. Some of the explorers out there, only deal with the current state of the blockchain, and which is a transient state which moves along with the chain tip. We actually harvest all the data from genesis all the way to chain tip, and that allows you for doing all sorts of analytics, aggregation of data, because we're completing that. Another way to look at it is that at exhaustive data is that we have a very broad scope of data we harvest from blockchains, whereas some of the other applications usually have a very narrow scope, only focusing at validators or specific use cases. Our scope is really general. So that goes for individual blockchains. We also provide a multi-chain analytics layer on top. So if we have a data layer for single blockchains, we have an overlay layer which is multi-chain analytics. So you can actually compare individual blockchains. You can see how assets move from one chain to another and all that sort of stuff. And the fourth characteristic of our technology is that we have generalized technology that supports many different types of blockchains. So Polkadot is marketed or branded as a heterogeneous multi-chain, which basically means that the multi-chain consists of all sorts of different individual blockchains. Whereas, for example, the Ethereum 2 specification is a sharded universe of similar EVM blockchains by a beacon chain. So it would be a homogeneous multi-chain, the Ethereum 2 specification. Polkadot allows for a multi-chain of all sorts of different blockchains, and going back to specialization and delegation as our guiding forces, that's what we see happening with blockchains themselves. That all sorts of blockchains are developed that have specific features that are optimized for the work they do, And with interoperability between blockchains, the work can actually go to the blockchain that is best fit to do that work. So Substrate is a very important technology that Parity Technologies has developed, which is a development framework that allows you to build all sorts of blockchains. And if you develop your blockchain with the Substrate development framework, then you have Polkadot compatibility, or you can have Polkadot compatibility, which means you can have interoperability between all these blockchains. Our Block Explorer technology works with any substrate-based blockchain, and that in turn results in our technology working for all sorts of types of blockchains. So we don't only provide Block Explorer and analytics technology for Ethereum virtual machine type blockchains, but for Bitcoin type blockchains, for relay chain type blockchains, for beacon chain blockchains, for Zcash type blockchains, any type basically. So this summarizes a bit how we differentiate ourselves with our analytics technology. So this is a sheet we kind of borrowed from Web3 Foundation. It is a visualization of what a multi-chain looks like. The circle, you know, you could look at that as a relay chain, and all the pink blocks are individual blockchains that interoperate, and all the lines is the interoperability between the blockchains. We provide analytics for such a multi-chain. So what does it look like in practice? You know, we have many instances of our Substrate or EVM-based block explorers, which are all the blocks on the fringe. And basically it consists of running a node, running a blockchain through a node, having a harvester technology on top of that, harvesting all sorts of data from the blockchain and disseminating that information through an API. And you know, then you have a solo chain type block explorer and an analytics platform. We have an additional layer on top of that, an orchestration of all these type of explorers into a multi-chain explorer, which has its own harvester and API and a user interface. And an example of a user interface is Polkascan.io, which has been active for quite some time already, which is an ongoing project that keeps getting updated with all the new networks coming into existence. And that is an entry point for everyone in the Polkadot ecosystem to see what's actually happening on these blockchains. So this is an example of the user interface. It's a bit basic still. We are anticipating the official network launch. So these are testnets. We have 4 testnets on at the moment. And with color coding, you can actually identify on which network you are. So we have the Alexander network, the Edgeware network, the Robonomics and Joystream network. They all have their own color codes, and you know, you see these color codes back. So it's one user interface that allows you to browse through all these networks. You can have hyperlinks from one network to the other. Well, and it looks like any other block explorer. Of course, you have your blocks, your transactions, your transfers. Well, there's some specific sections about governance. We have about 500 aggregation charts already, which work for any network and shows, you know, what the average block time per day is. So ideally, that would be constant. It helps you visualize when something is wrong with your network, what the throughput is, how many transactions each and every blockchain processes, how many active accounts are there. And it all gets really interesting, of course, when you can get to that next aggregation layer of multi-chain data to see how networks compare to each other, or what the aggregated sum is of throughput of 100 blockchains in such a multi-chain. And that's what we're working towards. So, where are we right now? I think Polkadot technology has come quite a long way. We're at the any day now, the Kusama network will launch. We have spent the past year on developing the technology for our Substrate Explorer, for our EVM Explorers and a multi-chain Explorer. We have built a high-performance architecture. An important point to make with Block Explorer technologies is that if you want to, provide real-time data analytics, there is always a hard performance metric you need to take into account, which is the block time. If you want to provide real-time data, everything you harvest, with all the data you harvest, you need to be able to process that within the block time, otherwise you'll start lagging and you will never be back with real-time data. So we have a high-performance architecture, and it is a scalable architecture, both vertically and horizontally, that we are capable of providing real-time multi-chain analytics for hundreds or even thousands of blockchains. So the technology is ready for that, and now we are basically waiting for Polkadot to launch with the test network, so we can go into ongoing feature development. Our focus is now really shifting to a service management type of activity. And technically we can handle hundreds or thousands of blockchains, but if we need to run nodes and if we need to run harvesters and at that order of magnitude, then obviously there is a service management challenge and a service orchestration challenge if we want to do that ourselves, or if we want to help enterprise customers dealing with that. So this is where we are right now. We are kind of shifting our focus towards service management activities rather from e-technology, focus for which the problems we have solved at this point. So we are ready for Kusama network. It will launch any day now, and that will help us prepare and help the ecosystem prepare for the real Polkadot launch at the end of the year or at the start of next year. So you should look out for that. And if you want to know anything about the data in Kusama or Polkadot, then Polkascan is your best way to go. Polkascan.io is our multi-chain block explorer platform. You can follow us on Medium, on GitHub for all our open source work, and on Twitter. I'll give you a sec. And again, we are Web3 Scan. We're building Polkascan, and we make multi-chain data accessible and understandable. And I have 1.5 minutes left. So if there's any question, I'm more than happy to answer that.
First of all, thank you for your work. I personally use Polkascan to read the data. My question is, because all those multi-chain, they share many common data, so I understand it's easier to harvest. But each one probably they will have some unique data. They are the specialized areas. My question is, will you harvest those data, and how will you present them? Do you have plan to have a specified view for a specific chain? Thank you.
So I'll take the last minute to answer that question. Substrate really helps us with this challenge. So Substrate is a framework that allows you to build any type of blockchain, and obviously all these blockchains differentiate from each other. One will focus on governance, the other will focus on smart contracts, another will focus on, high performance balance transfers, or any other type of thing you can imagine building a blockchain for. So one of the key innovations of Substrate is that every Substrate implementation is the same except for the runtime. And the runtime is, you could look at it as the firmware of the blockchain. That's the only thing that differentiates one Substrate blockchain from another. One cool feature is that all these runtimes have metadata embedded in them, and that actually defines all the functions, all the events, all the storage calls that exist within the runtime. So it describes your API and decoding context for your API with that specific runtime. So we are able, with our multi-chain explorer, to process the runtime's metadata, and based on that metadata, you can actually tailor your presentation layer and your blockchain harvester strategies on top of that. So it's really the innovation of Substrate that allows us to build a generalized Substrate block explorer, and that allows us in our explorer to differentiate. Yeah. So my time is up. Thank you very much.